Hey my wonderful weirdlings, welcome to the channel. This is Beyond Authentic, where we go beyond the mundane to tell you all about authentic witchcraft. My name is Lisa and today's video is all about Lughnasadah or Lughnasadah or Lammas. Whatever you want to call it, it's the Sabbat that is coming up this weekend. So if you want to know more about that, stay tuned. Okay, so I guess the first question is, what about the name? So, Lammas is what a lot of people call it. It's kind of the name that it's often referred to these days, largely because it's a lot easier to say than Lughnasadah. And when we say Lughnasadah, I'll put it on screen, because Lughnasadah is actually spelled very, very different to how it's pronounced, and it's actually a celebration of the word Lu. Now, Lammas and Lughnasadah are not actually the same holiday, although they've kind of been merged in sort of modern times. Now, originally the holiday Lughnasadah was actually a funeral feast for the god Lu's foster mother, and I have to refer to my notes to this. Her name was Teal'c. I think I've said that right. Again, I'll put the details on screen. Now, at this time there was a funeral feast, so there was a massive feasting. The whole community would come together, so they would have lots of different sort of competitions like horse racing and athletic competitions, all this sort of thing that they would be doing at the time as part of the celebration. As well as the sports competitions, there would also be music and storytelling, and a lot of that sort of oral tradition would be passed down. But it was also the time that local laws were made, so this was a really important feast. Now, because it coincided with the time of the first harvest, because you wanted to have a harvest for a feast, obviously, it became one of those traditional harvest sort of celebrations. So I mentioned Lughnasadah and I said about the god Lu. So what do we know of Lu? Well, he was a sun god, basically. He was a solar deity. It's part of the Irish Celtic tradition, and he was very much linked in with things like craftsmanship, working with his hands, toiling in the fields, that sort of thing. He was also linked in with some of the creative arts, so music, art, poetry, things like that. But he was also linked to victory and war, so there's an awful lot of sides to this sun god, and he was worshipped in a lot of different ways. If that's Lughnasadah, what is Lammas? Well, Lammas basically is a bastardization of the original term loaf mass, and that was a Catholic mass, a Catholic ritual, which basically celebrated the harvest. So it was the first harvest festival, if you like, and it basically was one of those ways that the Catholic Church usurped the sort of traditional pagan traditions of the time by kind of going, look, this is your celebration, but we're going to slightly change it and rebrand it effectively as part of the Catholic Church. So it's no longer heathen, it's now within the Catholic Church, because the Anglo-Saxons had been celebrating this feast for a hell of a long time. And I've got to tell you, if you're not from Britain, the thing us Brits really like isn't a good excuse for a good old party. So trying to persuade people not to have a feast when it's been part of that tradition for so many centuries isn't going to happen. So the Catholic Church was really, really clever by just basically rebranding it and saying you can have your feast, but instead of worshipping that pagan god, just do it in the name of this god. And that's kind of what happened. These days the holiday is less about the sun god Lu himself and more about that harvest connotation. Now, that could be related to the fact that that original celebration, that original funeral feast for his foster mother, was because she was an agricultural goddess. She actually gave her life bringing in the harvest, and so that connotation is something that is still there today, even though we don't actually have that first harvest period anymore at this time, because obviously these days, thanks to modern agricultural methods, things are grown in greenhouses, things are grown under plastic, there are new varieties of crops that are grown throughout the year. So even when we go to the supermarket, the idea of seasonal fruit and veg doesn't really happen anymore. It's why a lot of pagans really feel a disconnect with this holiday and that traditional kind of focus on the first harvest. Now, if you want to celebrate it, you can decorate your altar like I've done behind me. So I've actually just, believe it or not, I've just cut out some ears of corn and coloured and painted them brown and put some gold on. So there's some there, there's some more just behind me somewhere on there. The candles I've got burning are orange and this one's yellow, so the colours to bring into your altar are oranges and yellows, still very much the sort of summery colours, but kind of not quite that bright buttercup yellow, kind of moving slightly more into the mustardy tones, into that sort of wheat tones, but also green, which is why I'm wearing this camouflage top today. And it's why my makeup is green and my lipstick has a gold sheen to it. So it's all bringing those colours in together. So for me, because I'm gluten intolerant, I have a small bowl there with some gluten-free porridge oats in, because this holiday is all about all different types of grain, not just about wheat and bread. Although a lot of people will make a ceremonial loaf, or they will make a particular bread and have it on this holiday as a part of the celebration. So they might bake some rolls, they might bake a loaf, they might bake all sorts of, you know, the traditional harvest plat where they plat the loaf. All of that is part of this sort of first harvest festival. There's also a whole load of different herbs and flowers that are linked in with this holiday as well. So I'll put them on screen as to what some of those are, some of those correspondences. But basically anything that you have in your garden that you are able to cut at this period of time can be used in celebration. So if I just move the camera slightly up, I don't know whether you can see, just there hanging up, I've actually got some dried herbs. There's some lemongrass, some thyme, some basil, some rosemary, some sage, just hanging up there, just drying. And again, that's hanging up there above the altar because again, it is part of the harvest. And for me, we are now in an abundant period. All of my herbs are sprouting, all of my herbs are looking wonderful. So this is the best time to cut them, when they're at their peak, and then get them dried. So that's literally what I'm doing. And for me, that's part of my sort of low-key celebrations. Now, again, for me, this isn't like one of the big Sabbats, like the summer solstice or the winter solstice, but normally I would be preparing for a pagan camp this coming weekend, where we have all sorts of things that happen during that camp. It's very much about the harvest festival. We light a ritual bonfire that's lit for the entire time. So basically once that bonfire is lit, it becomes sacred, and then you're not allowed to burn rubbish, you're not allowed to even throw cigarette butts in there, or sort of any food that you've not eaten, because it is a sacred fire, and that remains sacred for the whole of that weekend until it's desanctified at the end of the final day. Now, one of the big celebrations that we have there is actually part of a traditional folklore celebration, which is the Ballad of John Barleycorn, or the story of John Barleycorn. Now, if you don't know, John Barleycorn is a historic figure who was written about most famously probably by Robert Burns way back in the 1500s, were the first written accounts of the John Barleycorn story. But even those accounts say that it had been around for perhaps hundreds of years at that point. If you don't know what the story of John Barleycorn is, basically it's the story of the personification of the fields, the energy of the fields, so the grain, the wheat, the rye, the barley, all of that. And basically it's how that energy goes through various trials and tribulations and grows and grows and grows through to this period of time, through to sort of the early autumn, late summer, when it then gets cut just as it's in its prime. It gives up its life, it is slaughtered, and then is laid back in the ground. And then the barley corn, the rye, the wheat is then taken, and a lot of that is then used to produce alcohol. And the Robert Burns story, because of Robert Burns, and then goes on to tell about the woes of drinking and how, you know, it can lead you down dark paths and all of that. The basic story does seem to be that John Barleycorn gave his life at the peak of his life, ready to then come back the following season. And the camp that I go to, we celebrate with there's a whole ritual based around the John Barleycorn story, where the Wicker Man is built and everything. For us, in the reenactment of the John Barleycorn story, that ritual, when John Barleycorn cries out in pain and is slaughtered and falls to the ground, at that point, a child, the youngest child of the camp, is then taken around the circle and basically introduced as the personification of new life. It is very much a celebration of that life cycle. So as John Barleycorn's energy goes back into the ground, new life is brought forth. And in our camp, that is literally done with a child being sort of walked around the camp. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you ever get the opportunity to go to some of the pagan camps, particularly around the Sabbats, I thoroughly, thoroughly recommend it. They are an amazing experience and a wonderful, wonderful time. If you want to perform a Lammas ritual or Lughnasadah ritual, what sort of thing can you do? Well, you can make ceremonial bread. So you can bake bread and bake your intention into it. As I'm doing this plaiting motion, and you don't know what I'm doing, but in my head I'm plaiting an imaginary loaf of bread. You can bake a bread, you can bake loaves. If you can't bake, then you can go and buy something and enjoy that feast with your family and loved ones. It's a time for abundance, so sharing prosperity. So maybe donate to charity, maybe go to a charity shop, give them some old clothes or some unwanted items, and maybe purchase a few other things or make a donation to charity that way. But it's also the time where you can celebrate with friends and family. So have a barbecue, drink mead. Mead is a fantastic drink at this time, or wine or beer, because they come from those crops. So anything like that. If you are teetotal, then that's absolutely fine. Drink something like lemonade, because again, you've got that sort of seasonal element to it, where that lemon represents the sun. But there's lots of things like that that you can do. So you don't have to do a massive ritual celebration at this time of year. The key things to bear in mind is that this is a time of abundance, this is a time of prosperity, and this is a time of harvest and reaping what you sow. So it's an amazing time to kind of sit back and look at the benefits of some of the work you've put in over the last 12 months. So for me, I'll be doing something on the day. I might do an abundance working. I will certainly be honouring the gods, and by having a libation, I might have a little bit of mead myself, because I thoroughly enjoy mead. And I will be basically just contemplating my own sort of successes this year, and sort of the effort that I've put into both my channels and in life in general, and kind of celebrating the accomplishments that I myself have had this year. And that again is something that sometimes I think we do find a disconnect with, is celebrating our own successes. And so for me, that is a key thing, and it is something that for me, when I'm away at camp, I do take that time to sit and kind of just reconnect. And so even though I'm not at camp this year again, we'll be doing that at home. If you want to, you can always help me celebrate my journey here on YouTube by clicking the subscribe button, and also then pressing the bell icon and clicking it to all, so that YouTube notifies you each and every time I upload a video. Also, it'd be amazing if I could have an abundance of thumbs up. That would be amazing on this video. Got to get it in there somehow, don't I? Don't forget, if you haven't already, check out the Authentic Army down in the description box. We're a group of really small creators here on YouTube that keep it 100% real. None of us are worried about PR lists or anything like that, which allows us to be 100% honest, 100% genuine in our opinions. So if that sounds like content you'd like to watch, do please check them out just down below. But that is it from me today. And as I always say, stay you, stay weird, stay authentic, and I'll definitely see you next time. Bye-bye. Then still decorating the altar is a thing to do. Now that doesn't make any sense. But as I say, that is it from me, and as I always find out later. The history of Lammas, or Lughnasadah. Oh no, not necessarily the history. In this feast period that they have been looking forward to help with that sentence, to help that, fuck's sake. We've got, you know, giant under, fuck's sake. It doesn't have just to, it doesn't have to be, fuck's sake. A lot of pagans really struggle with, a lot of modern pagans really do have a disconnect with this. A lot of modern pagans really struggle finding a fuck's sake. This is the next Sabbat in our